I have no idea how to use one of these. I've never used one of these things in the presentation. Oh, nice. Okay. So, technology, artistic practice. I thought I'd do actually is outline things that people tend to think technology means in artwork, which I don't think it means. These bullet points are all very, very personal. Other artists will think completely differently, but these are the ones I thought I'd put up here just to kind of set the landscape for what I think it means to work with technology in making artworks. Disruption, people talk a lot about technology disrupting conventional businesses. I think my take on that is we're artists, so we're disrupting anyway, we're supposed to do that. So whether we're using technology or not is kind of by the by. That should be kind of part of our mindset to start with. Interaction, that's an interesting one given that so many art pieces with technology are interactive. I think there's a problem with that. I find a problem with that because interactive pieces, they bring an expectation from the audience that somehow you go to a piece and you kind of wave your hand in front of it and it does something. And if it doesn't do something, you say, is it supposed to do, is there a camera somewhere? Is it supposed to actually respond? It's not moving. Or it does something, you think, did I do that or did somebody else do that? And I think, unless it's done well, and it can be done well, but unless it's done well, it kind of constrains the way you think about making the work. It constrains the creative process because there's kind of a deliverable at the end, and I kind of have a bit of an issue with that. And also interactive pieces, it's hard to make them generative, and I'll talk a bit about that in a second. New aesthetic, this idea about technology being an aesthetic, I don't particularly buy that either, so I'm kind of skipping over that. I don't do glitchy stuff, or pixelated stuff. Digital. That word seems to mean a particular thing in certain artistic circles. If you talk to big funding organisations, arts council and so on, they say, yeah, we do digital. What they mean is we want to do stuff online. We want to reach out to other audiences, so we want to kind of websiteify things. So I'm not interested in that as an end in itself. It's stuff I do, but I don't think it's kind of an interesting way of, again, constraining or directing an artistic process. Big data, again, there's lots of good stuff going on with that, but again, I think it's kind of a constraint if you're working where that's something that has to be shown in the final piece. It's difficult to kind of get into the creative mindset and aim at that at the same time. I think if you get there, it's a good thing, it's serendipitous, but it's something I have a problem in trying to kind of guide myself towards as an actual endpoint. Virtual reality, VR and AR, I can give a whole new talk about that. It's cool stuff, it's important stuff, it's amazing things happening, even right now in this building. I haven't quite got traction with that yet. I still see it as a medium, or as kind of medium in itself, rather than a way of building works. So it's in practice because I'm kind of getting there, but I'm not quite at the stage where I can kind of flow into it as a way of, as a kind of framework for building things in. So, brackets and question marks. I'm kind of getting there, but not quite there yet. So I'm just kind of being honest with you. So those are the non-interests. What's the interests? I'll just throw them out here as a group. It's all this kind of stuff. A lot of this comes from software background, rather than technology per se. And I'll just look at some works, show you some works which kind of highlight what I mean by these terms. Some are fairly obvious, some are probably less obvious. So amplification, manipulation. Amplification, I guess I mean you can use technology, I'm thinking software here, but it applies to other things, to increase the effect you can have on the materials you're working with. So for example, video material, when you manipulate video in software, you can do such amazing things that you can't normally. Software replicates easily. If you can build one thing, you can build a million things almost for free. That's not true of hardware, obviously. You can manipulate material, sound, visuals in ways that you can't really do in the old-fashioned analog world. So this is a piece I did for Shoma Jazz Singh 5 years ago. I did a sound score based on the music of James McMillan, the Tenderberry sponsor is. And the task was to take his linear music and turn it into tiny loop segments which could then be layered and spatialized in the performance space. And there was nothing around that could actually do that. There were no tools that really provided that, so I ended up having to build something myself. One thing that I think is significant, if you talk to artists, technologists, is they build their own tools. In fact, artists do that outside technology. So if there's a thing that you want to try and achieve, you find that you can't actually do it with the tools that are there. And part of the tool building process is the creative process. And I think it's very important that you think of these things as being the same. You can get obsessed with tool building. Software people do that. They get obsessed with the engineering rather than the end result. But I think it's an important part of the process. And part of the exploring of the work and what I wanted to achieve was part of the building of the tool. And from that came a score, which is doing spatializing. This probably doesn't make much sense if you don't do music technology, but essentially the score is the lines you see here, from left to right, as a musical score with no actual notes in it. But it is a score, as in you can play that, and you get out a sonic result. And I don't know whether the sound will work. If you know the main piece, this will sound really strange because I'm playing bits of it forwards and bits of it backwards. So the score essentially evaluates the audio and loops different parts of it and shifts those loops very, very gradually in time. And then moves things about in the space as well. So, mediation and generativity. What on earth do I mean by those? Back in 2002, I worked with a choreographer called Michael Klein on a piece that was commissioned through Ballet Frankfurt. And Michael wants to build a classical pas de deux, a classical ballet form, but one which was influenced by genetics in some way. So he wants to essentially have a genetic structure description of the pas de deux, which would render itself out differently every time the piece was performed. So that's where the mediation comes in. So it's the same piece in a sense, but every time you saw it, it was slightly different. So we have our two dancers, and we built a piece where we displayed, you can just see there on the left-hand side, the graphical score that scrolled, and the dancers could see it. I talked about this new aesthetic thing a few minutes ago. We showed this piece first in Frankfurt, where the audience could see the screens. They were facing out towards the front. The second night, we decided at the very end to actually turn the screens around and hide them so the audience could see the dancers, but they couldn't see any of the technology. And that worked much better. It worked better, the dancers told us afterwards, because when they were dancing, they didn't feel they were being judged by what was on the screens and what the audience might be watching. It comes back to interaction in a sense. They didn't want the audience to look at the screens and go, is the dancer doing something because there's a red section there or not? So it worked much better when the technology was completely hidden. It was an important part of the process, but it wasn't an apparent part of the result. It just looked like a modern ballet piece. And as I say, it looked different each time. And we did a repeat piece, we did a solo with Nicole Peisel here the year after, which again was mediated. She had a laptop which had a system that had a lifespan of 18 months, a software lifespan, and she had to perform it in whatever state it was in at the time she performed. So depending on where she was in the world, what time zone and so on, the piece would evolve constantly. So mediation and language. I did some work with a choreographer named Kate Citrio. This was a European funded project, so we got to show it in Brussels, which was kind of fun. We had a software system that generated these action words which we projected down onto the stage, and then Tara, our dancer here, had to interpret those. So I'll skip over. Let's try and show that. Is that going to work, or is that not going to work? That's not going to work. Is that going to work? So anyway, that was what the down projection looked like. It was just this graphical form with words inside it. It was scrolling, so you see his progress bars here. And the entire thing rotated as well, because there was no kind of front and back. It was a promenade piece. I bet I won't be able to turn that sound off now. Is that one? Oh, is that one? So it was all generated by code, so that's essentially the structure of the text form, but laid out in a time sense. So you see the entire thing here. You see what times in the piece certain things happen. And then a little bit later, we got to perform it at another festival in London, and Kate had moved to New York then, so I had to build a system whereby she could live code it from New York and affect the dancer in London at the same time. And it went great. And then at the very end, we realised that we hadn't rigged the camera, so Kate couldn't see what the hell we were doing. So she was live coding completely blind, and I would then Skype back to her in text what was going on stage, and then she would have to kind of respond to that. I've done a bit of work with Wayne McGregor, Random Dance, over the years, and he wanted, again, a piece where he had some software that would disrupt what the dancers were doing. So when I said don't do disruption, I was lying. Wayne wanted something disruptive. That was part of the process, which he uses all the time, whether he's using technology or not. So he built a software system which worked in text. So we looked at Tricia Brown's work. This is a choreographic work from the 70s where she works with letters, turns them into numbers, turns them into locations in a cube, and then uses that as a choreographic framework. We looked at Leonardo da Vinci. We looked at Richard Serra's sculpture. Again, he works with these things called action terms, where it's all about the actual terms and the working of the material rather than the final result. And there are some of the words he uses. And we built this system where dancers could work in text, and they would get a 3D form rendered out on screen that they then had to interpret on stage. And sometimes it would be easy, sometimes it would be not easy. So that's kind of the disruptive aspect. To get them out of their usual ways of thinking and challenge them with different ways of thinking about what they're doing in the space. And it created these digital artifacts as it went along. So, a few shots of the dancers with notebooks. Dancers always use notebooks all the time. So they were taking things they'd typed in, turned into graphics, which are then interpreted in text, wrote down, and then used as background material. And yeah, for reasons of time, I'll skip through this, but that's Anna actually working out from something she's seen on screen how to make it work as a physical movement. If we've got time to run this just for a few more seconds, you'll see she starts working horizontally, then decides it doesn't work and just turns up vertically instead. Because the graphics are so abstract, they can be interpreted in different directions. And that's the one that you can see she's kind of working through as it gets through more detail. Something similar, I did a visualization piece for Gisara Minora, who's a choreographer who's deaf, so she was interested in turning sound that she couldn't hear into visuals that she could see. So we built a sound to visual system that started both with the sound and with her notations. There's some notations she's made in the building of the piece, so that was kind of an inspiration for the graphics as well. It was at the bottom here. Again, it was all code-driven, and we got some visuals that we then used as we told the piece. And that's a shot, I think, from Lisbon, I think, when we showed it there. Generativity, emulation, visualization, some work based on John Whitney's early computer artwork dated from the 1950s, 1960s, from the early analog computers onwards. And I was commissioned to build essentially a three-dimensional version of this for Kinetica. So we took his artworks that are very, very flat, two-dimensional, geometric, and I built a three-dimensional version of that, which then got projected, and which, again, I'm not going to show you, I'm afraid. I'm doing more work with Wayne McGregor on these are pieces by Joseph Albers, Homage to the Square. He made several hundred of these pieces, all of which were square, and all of which had sub-squares in these same proportions. And one thing Wayne wanted to build was essentially a software version of this which would create new forms based on these. So it generates an infinite, never repeating series of these homages to the square, which are based on the original shapes and on the original colours. So we've got the colours from the Albers Foundation, and it generates new forms. And if you've got time, maybe at the end I can show you the science actually running that. I've done quite a bit of work with Simeon Nelson and Rob Gottman. This is a piece that was commissioned for a festival in Poland and in Tallinn. And it's a large projection piece. You can see it's on the side of a church here. It's a shot from Toruń in Poland. And again, it's all software driven, so we didn't do any animation for this. It was purely exploring what the software could give us. And in fact, a lot of the forms we see here were just accidental. We were just working live coding the thing, getting nice results from it, and thinking, yes, we'll stick with that. And I'll just see if I can skip through this a bit further. Kind of a reflection on cosmology, in a sense. It starts with the grid and ends up with the grid particles leaving their constraints and being subject to internal mechanics. So you can kind of see there. As I say, not video, it was all in the software, it would be slightly different each time it was shown, slightly different. And we got to play with King's College Chapel in Cambridge, which was massive. That was a lot of fun. More recent piece, working with Simon and Rob through a Wellcome Trust-funded piece, working with a medical data visualization expert at UCL, and we're doing response to the way cancer forms and is treated. This was serendipitous because right until the very end, I had no idea what the visuals were going to be like. I had some vague idea that they'd be kind of organic, but only when we started building the old systems, the Voronoi systems, and working with the software, all of a sudden these things came out. Again, it's a kind of amplification. You can draw these things by hand, but without the software to give you the power to try things out, you don't get these kinds of surprises. I guess you do in sculpture, you do in other materials, but software is also a material in that way. It lets you surprise yourself with things. And we've got these wonderful animated effects. I'll show one here. I'm on time, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, I had no idea I'd get these wonderful effects until I actually built a particular generating system and a particular cell manipulating system, and it came out with this, and we were very, very happy with it. So let's see how we do it here. So you see this sense, it looks like a kind of a malignant growth happening into this form, and then the thing may reverse and revert back to the form it was at the beginning. And because Rob composed the music for it, we actually had a kind of a live version with a Goldfield Ensemble that we toured to the Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival in 2013. On the theme of emulation, we were commissioned to do a piece for Sonic Arts Network, as it was a few years ago, which was building a English church bell tower. In effect, we're doing it all with lasers and LEDs, so we built these things from scratch. The graphic you see at the bottom, built by our colleague Dan Jones, shows you how English church change ringing works. How when you're ringing bells, you can move the actual bells forward and backwards in a sequence as you ring through the changes. Some of these change sequences can last for several hours. There are all sorts of notations for how you actually illustrate them when you're learning them, and we kind of built a software system that could show that, which is what you're seeing on the floor here. And then you could actually run through the changes and work with them by putting your hands through the beams of lasers, the laser beams you can see in the center sections here. So that was kind of a classic emulation, taking one kind of artifact, one kind of piece, one structure, and just completely reimagining it in a different way. Back to Wayne McGregor, he commissioned us he wanted us to make a dancer for his company. He had 10 dancers, he wanted another dancer, and again he wanted a dancer who would be disruptive, a dancer that would be disobedient. So we worked with an anthropologist to talk about what it means to have a body in a space, what is an actual body, and how do you respond to it, how do you respond to other people in the same space as you, because you do it subconsciously, you do it without realizing. So we built this thing. You can see here it's a big screen, it's an upright plasma screen. It works in 3D. The dancers are wearing 3D glasses here. Big technical challenge, how to find a screen that will work in 3D when it's actually upright rather than level. So we've got one of the very last plasma screens in Chicago, in fact, where we were working on this. It's only plasma screens that will do that, will do 3D upright. The newer screens don't. So we built this thing. You can just about see on the right the visual outline of it. It doesn't look like a body at all. It hasn't got 2 arms and 2 legs, but it reacts like a body. It's about the right size, and it's tracking video material, so the sense of movement it has is based on video, so it moves with the kind of dynamics and the kind of physics that the body has. You can see here Katrina on the right there is actually trying to respond and do something as a response to what is effectively another dancer in the same space, even though the dancer isn't human. And yeah, so again, dancers' notebooks. This is a very, very quick image of how the thing evolves. I think I can kind of move on with that. Despite not being real, it has a lot of the kind of qualities of a physical object. It looks like it's kind of made of muscles and skin and fur, I guess. This is a time lapse, but actually in real life it doesn't actually move like a normal sized body. And the piece that I'm working on with Simeon and Rob at the moment, the Welcome Trust, is going into the Lumiere Light Festival in Durham in November. And it's a 3-metre diameter thing called a cosmoscope, so it's trying to capture elements of cosmology in terms of the physics of cosmology, elements of microscopic molecular structure, and elements of blood flow through the body. So macro scale, micro scale, and human scale in the middle, because we are right in the middle of those 2 scales. And it draws on our projection work, but this is going to be full of LEDs, so it's going to be essentially a 3-dimensional projection. And again, it'll be all this software rendered, so the software will be running and generating the visuals as it goes. And I'm right in the middle of working on that now. And here are some visualizations. We have a web version running at the moment. Yeah, if I can just show you the tiny bit off. If I'm online, if I'm not, then I'm not.
Should be in my second minute.
Or maybe I blocked feedback. No? Oh, there we are. Okay. Yes, no, maybe. Okay, so you get some sense of it. And I'm now in the process of turning this thing into some software system that can talk to the actual hardware lighting, which is proving slightly challenging. But yeah, I think I'm done. Interesting. Lots of videos playing. Wait for B1. Oh, that's now a B1 button. What's that going to do? Oh, right. Okay, enough of that. So yeah, I think I'm done.